What's up? I'm Coach Dan Blewett. In today's video, let's talk about the unwritten rule of running up the score. So if you're new here, I'm Dan Blewett. I'm a former pro pitcher. I also owned my own baseball and softball academy, and we had our travel teams, and I was the head coach, and I was the roving GM, and I dealt with this, where other teams would try to run up the score on us when we didn't play well. Sometimes we had a big lead, and I had to coach my players about what the do's and don'ts were. So let's talk about the overall thing of respecting your opponents, but also continuing to play the game and also understanding how fast the score can change, especially in youth baseball. All right, so here is my take on running up the score and some of the do's and don'ts when the score starts to get pretty wide. And I'll give you my complete take at the very end, so stick around to the end of this video, and I'll tell you when I think what that magic number of runs is, depending on the age. All right, so number one, you don't stop playing the game even if you have a big lead. So say you're up by 10 or 12 runs, you don't stop playing the game because that's also insulting to the other team. So what does this mean? This means, yes, you don't need to be stealing bases when you have maybe like a 12 or 15 run lead, right? That is an example of running up the score. But it's not to say you go up there and just sort of like have a half-hearted at bat, that you just wave at pitches, or that you don't tag up on stuff. You still do that. You still play the game and score the runs that you're supposed to score. You just maybe start to ease off of going the extra base, maybe not going first to third, maybe going station to station, stuff like that. But overall, you don't stop playing the game because that's even more insulting to the other team. Number two, when you have a really big lead, as I mentioned, think about going station to station. So this is something that's really easy as a coach to explain. So say, as an example, you have a runner on second base and there's a single up the middle, and ordinarily that runner on second would round third and probably come home and score, or at least try, right? When you have a 12-run lead, and I'm just going to use 12 as my sort of basis for right now, when you have that huge lead, you probably just hold that runner at third and go station to station. Now it's going to require 2 singles to score him or her, but that's okay, right? That's what it means going station to station. And again, if there's a deep fly ball to right field and you've won out, you still are going to tag and go to third. That's still playing the game. That's not disrespectful to the other team. What would be disrespectful would be maybe if it was hit really deep into the wall, and then tagging and going second to home, right? That might not be right. So, but remember, you still take the next base, you still play the game the right way, but you should go station to station. Number three, as I just mentioned, you still tag up. This is, again, still playing the game. Now, if it's going to be really, really close, you don't need to do that. But if it's a no-brainer tag, you need to tag, right? Ball hit really deep into the outfield, you have a runner on third with 1 out, score that run. You need to score that run. Because again, that's not playing the game, right? That's even more disrespectful to your opponent. So tagging up is still the right thing to do, even when you have a gigantic lead and you're trying to be respectful of your opponent. Number four, do not bunt. And I would recommend not stealing when you have a gigantic lead, all right? So again, you don't need to continue to run up the score. That's what stealing does, where you're just trying to get extra runners into a scoring position. You should still have competitive at-bats. You should still tag up. You should still take the bases that you're entitled to through batted balls and all that sort of stuff, but you don't need to be bunting. Because you don't need to be pushing runners over. You don't need to be bunting for hits, and you don't need to be stealing, right? Now, when we talk about bunting for hits, that's a little bit different sometimes because bunting for a hit can just be a typical at bat for a small pesky player, right? So is there anything wrong with doing a drag bunt? I say just read the room in general, right? If your team is like bombs away and just destroying a team, and then you lay down a sneaky bunt to third base because their third baseman's playing really far back, that's probably not the right thing to do. That's just kind of like rubbing their nose in it, right? Oh, you're just crushing the ball, the warning tracks, and then you drop it down a bunt as like a ha-ha. But then if you're just like a really like fast kind of pesky team in general, and your leadoff hitter is just like really kind of standard part of their game, or maybe there's drag bunting between first and second quite a bit, and it's not like, hey, we're just trying to run up the score, this is an actual part of my game that I always do, then I think that might be okay. But again, in general, you're probably not going to bunt, and again, definitely read the room. Number five, definitely sub in your lesser players. And this is just important as a coach in general. You need to look for opportunities to get your bench players more innings, right? You probably have sort of a system where your best players are in the game most of the time, but still will sit the bench occasionally. Your kind of middle tier players will maybe get like 2/3 playing time, and maybe your lowest tier players get like a half share playing time. When you get a big lead, you're up by 12 in the third, get your subs in the game, take your starters out. That's not disrespectful to the other team, and that's a good time to rest your best players. and also get other players in there where they can work on stuff, just get more bats, get lower pressure innings. That's an important time to get your players into the game. Next one, if the ball goes to the backstop, should you let your runner score from third? Should you let your runner on second go to third base on a ball to the backstop? This one can be tricky, but again, I think the answer is yes. It's not a stolen base. It still falls under the category, in my eyes, of just playing the game. Now, if the other team has been a mess, like the catcher just really isn't very good, and this does happen at younger levels of baseball, the catcher just not very good, and it's been a really sloppy game with errors and a ton of balls going to the backstop, and it's just continuing on. Your team's up 14-1. Should you keep going every pass ball and just taking the next base? Maybe not. This is again another one where you want to read the room. But if it's still like a pretty clean game, and your team's just like beating the ball, you're just hitting a ton, and you just happen to be up 11 runs, and then there's a pass ball that goes to the backstop, I say probably take the base. But again, this one can be kind of tricky. So again, just read the room and just ask yourself, are people going to feel cringy about this? Like there's so many balls that go into the backstop. Do we need to go first to third and then home on all of these? Or can we maybe just like take one off, right? Maybe go every other one we take the base. Again, read the room, try to make a respectful decision. But again, if it's a relatively clean game and there's just a ton of hits going down, and then, I think you're still playing the game and being respectful of the game by taking the next base in that situation. All right, so what is the number that I think is when you start to shut this stuff down and start going station to station to try not to run up the score? At the high school level, I think it's probably 8+ runs, and it needs to be probably later in the game. If you're up 8-0 in the second inning, you don't shut anything down because it's still really, really early and the other team can chip away. If it's 8-0 in the sixth, you might shut things down. But I think 8 is probably that cusp where you probably don't need the extra runs. That's 2 grand slams for them to tie it. That's probably the right number, somewhere between 8 and 10. And if you think the number is 10, I'm on board with that too. But I'd say at least 8 is where you start to shut it down, probably at the high school level. Now at the middle school level, let's say age 14 to 12 to 14, I'd say that number is probably more like 10 to 12, probably closer to 12. And we all know that these games can shift on a dime. Player goes out there, loses their command, walks 2 batters, an error, a single, another walk, a double, and now suddenly 5 runs have scored, and the game has completely changed, right? So you can't shut it down at 8. I'm confident that's not the right number for middle school age players. It's probably more like 10 or 12 where you start to rein things back and start going station to station. But again, you also have to figure out what inning is it. How do you feel about the probability of this other team coming back? Are they a pretty darn good team, right? If they are, then you might need to keep kind of just chipping away, and maybe if it gets to 15, then you start to shut it down. Also, so again, just like kind of read the room. What does the talent level appear to be? If you've got 12 runs in the third, and this team is clearly not that talented, where they're just not going to come back, or you're just going to keep putting up 3 runs for every 1 run that they put up, then maybe you shut it down pretty early, right? But again, games at the middle school level can still change really, really fast. So don't put yourself in a pickle where you start shutting it down at 6 or 7 or 8 runs, and then they come back with a 4 spot, right? So don't do that to your team. Make sure you still, we're going to win this game, and we're not going to let them back in it, but we're also not going to embarrass them. And at the youth level, let's say under age 12, that number is probably like 12, right? 12 or more runs, pretty firm there. Big innings are common. 5+ runs are relatively common at the youth levels because there's so many errors. Pitching is so difficult. There are tons of walks, right? So things can change just with on 2 base hits because there's been 5 walks and 2 errors in the inning. So it's probably 12 at the youngest levels. It's probably 10 to 12 in the middle school age range. And it's probably like 8 to 10 at the high school range. That's my opinion. It's not absolute, but I think that's a pretty decent kind of feeler. And then again, you got to judge the other team's talent level. You got to judge just the feel of the game and how good is your team playing that day. Sometimes you can put up a big, 5, 6, 8 run spot on a team that's pretty good, and you might not feel comfortable with it, and that's okay. So again, judge it for yourself as a coach and as a player, but also understand that your job is to find a balance of making sure we secure this win and that it's an easy, comfortable win, but also not embarrassing the other team. All right. So leave me a comment below. What do you think about running up the score? What are the right things to do, the wrong things to do? Some of those sort of gray areas. What's your take? Leave a comment. I'd love to hear the discussion. And thanks for watching. I'll see you here in the next video.